Okay, for my report, I did the Don't Ask, Don't Tell Repeal Act of 2010, which according to its language provides for repeal of the current Department of Defense policy concerning homosexuality in the armed forces. That current legislation they are referring to is the law Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which came to law under President Bill Clinton in 1993, and it prohibits open homosexuality in the U.S. Armed Services. And what it was doing is it was attempting to combat earlier law, that had been in place in World War II, that outright banned homosexuality in the military. But it didn't really change anything. You couldn't be openly gay in the military still, so if you were outed at all, you would still be discharged from the military. And it also had pretty poor lifestyle repercussions for gays that were in the military, living a sheltered lifestyle as a result. But it kind of appears to be what we talk about in class as symbolic policymaking, which is when congressional policymaking can be more about appearance than substance. That's from Congress and its members. And that appears to be what this is. It's President Bill Clinton or that current congressional body saying, look, we're doing something about it, even though it's not a ripe time for anything to be done about it. But it can lead to the future repeal, which it did. This assisted in getting it out there in the public sphere and assisted in the future repeal of this law, which happened in 2010. Okay, so the road to repeal. It's important to understand the political climate of the 109th Congress. And it's important to know this climate because Don't Ask, Don't Tell was such a polarized issue in that the vast majority of Republicans opposed repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and the vast majority of Democrats were in favor of repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So in order for this piece of legislation to be successful, or a piece of legislation repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell to be successful, you really needed a strong Democratic presence in the House, the Senate, and the executive branch. And that wasn't the case in the 109th Congress. There was a majority of Republicans in the House, a majority of Republicans in the Senate, and an executive branch headed by President George W. Bush. Okay. However, despite the fact that the political climate was not ripe for a piece of legislation, another way a piece of legislation can be successful is if a policy window is open. And between 2002 and 2005, news reports began to circulate about the lack of Arab linguists in the U.S. military and a large amount of gay linguists being discharged.
The Christian Science Monitor today reporting the dearth of Arabic and other Middle Eastern language translators is so severe that the Army is offering a bonus to those who stay in the service or sign up to join it of up to $150,000. But it still won't repeal or even just happen not to apply the moronic Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy.
Okay, and I show you that video because I think it's important to understand that a big part of setting the agenda and paving the way for the success of a piece of legislation is knowledge accumulation, which is the rising awareness of some phenomena. And that's what this situation with the Arab linguist was. It was beginning to accumulate knowledge for the public. If it's being discussed in the news, that means the public they're thinking about it, they're maybe debating it with their friends or whatever. It's being talked about, which can ultimately lead to pressure on legislators to act on that. And this was really the beginning of that in the 109th Congress. But at the time, policy entrepreneurs appeared to see that this knowledge accumulation event, I'm not going to call it a focusing event, but some people thought that this was an opportunity to advance a piece of legislation. And a bill was introduced called the Military Readiness Enhancement Act in the 109th Congress with 122 co-sponsors. But as I said before, because the political climate wasn't right for this piece of legislation, given the strong Republican presence in Congress and in the executive branch, it was not successful. In the House, it was referred to the House Committee on Armed Services, and then it was referred to a subcommittee on military personnel, and it died there. And the reason it died there is because of what I said before. They knew that there wasn't enough support. There wasn't going to be enough support gathered in the House and Senate for this bill to be successful. So there's really no point in it going further. Anyone that looked at the bill would know that. And then also, even if somehow by some miracle it was successful, the president still holds the threat of veto, and President George W. Bush certainly would have vetoed any legislation that advanced the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Okay, so now the 110th Congress is in session, and not much has changed other than the fact that there is now a majority of Democrats in the House, yet the political climate still isn't ripe for any legislation regarding the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, because there's still a majority of Republicans in the Senate, and the executive branch, with the veto power, still has George W. Bush in office as president. So, nevertheless, they're given a certain shift in political tides that appeared to be unfolding, especially in 2007 when presidential popularity was very low, and another piece of legislation was advanced, and it was also called the Military Readiness Enhancement Act. And as you can see, now it has 149 co-sponsors, signaling the fact that it's really gathering support. All those things that happened before it now were snowballing support. But nevertheless, it still lived the same life of its big brother. It was referred to the House Committee on Armed Services, where it was referred to a subcommittee, where it died. Okay, and as I talked about before, the tides were shifting. George W. Bush's approval ratings were on the downward trend, and I bring up the shifting tides of the president's slipping job approval ratings because it appears as though that the political climate is about to change dramatically in favor, to a climate that would favor advancing more legislation on the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Okay, now I bring up policy incubation, which, according to Congress and its members, is keeping a proposal alive while it picks up support or waits for a better climate, or while a consensus begins to form that the problem to which it is addressed exists. And the reason I bring that up is because I believe that the two pieces of legislation advanced before, while there was a little bit of the nudging of a policy window at that time, the policy window wasn't open. So I believe that these policy entrepreneurs at the time were merely keeping this proposal alive by advancing these pieces of legislation and keeping it in the media, keeping people talking about it, so that when the political tide shifted, they would be able to advance a piece of legislation that would be successful. And that's what happened. President Obama was elected, and the 111th Congress saw a majority of Democrats and in the House, a majority of Democrats in the Senate, and President Barack Obama in the executive branch. And so now it appears, as I show through this clever picture, that the policy window is open for a piece of legislation regarding the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. It's been talked about for a while. Barack Obama actually campaigned and in his campaign said that he would attempt to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So yeah, it definitely appears as though the policy window is open. Okay. Not only is the policy window open because there's a shifting tide in the political climate, but also public opinion appears to have shifted. I show you here, this is a Gallup poll that shows that there was a 6% from November 2004, right before that first piece of legislation was brought in the 109th Congress. Since then, there's been a 6 percentage point change of all national adults that are now in favor of repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And more importantly than that, there's a 12-point percentage change in conservatives. So any conservative lawmaker now, their constituencies appear to be in favor of repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So that's even further opening the policy window, and this piece of legislation right now is ripe for passage. Okay, so the bill was introduced twice. At first it was blocked by the Senate Republicans. It wasn't even allowed to be debated, and that's because they were saying that they wanted the Pentagon to do some research to see if allowing gays to openly serve in the military would adversely affect military readiness. And so it was blocked. It was blocked, and then there was, and this is in 2010, in September of 2010, right before or during the lame duck session of Congress. And as we know, in 2010, there was about to be a dramatic shift, and Republicans were going to once again take over the House and Senate. So not only was the policy window now open, it was also really about to abruptly close. So this being blocked was really a big setback, but they cleverly brought it up again following the Pentagon study being released, and the study showed that the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell presents a low risk to military readiness. So the policy window is wide open as it can possibly be. The Republicans and liberals that weren't, or Democrats that weren't on board before, because of the no research being done, are now on board, and then all the other things I said before about the policy, or the political climate and public opinion are now all in their favor. So the policy window is wide open and about to shut. Like, this is their chance, and they advance it. They advance it using the Small Business Act as a vehicle to advance the legislation, and we're actually able to avoid the House Committee on Armed Services that I discussed before. And so this piece of legislation moved through the House and the Senate with 386 favor in the House, 65 in favor in the Senate, and then it was signed by President Barack Obama on December 22nd, 2010. Okay, and then right now I'm going to bring up adopting a policy, which is talked about in Congress and its members, and I'm going to read it real quick. Laws often embody ideas whose time has come. The right time for a policy is what John W. Kingdon calls the policy window, the opportunity presented by circumstances and attitudes to enact a policy into law. Policy entrepreneurs must seize the opportunity before the policy window closes and the idea's time has passed. Once policies are ripe for adoption, they must gain popular acceptance. This is the function of legitimation, the process through which policies come to be viewed by the public as right or proper. Okay, and the reason I bring this up is because I think this is exactly what happened with the trajectory of this policy coming into law. With the first two policies, the reason they failed is because the political climate wasn't ripe for any legislation to be adopted. And the reason this one was successful is because the political climate was ripe. And the trajectory of this bill followed this exact adopting a policy in Congress and its members. Policy entrepreneurs seized the opportunity before the policy window closed, and the previous piece of legislation helped make those policies ripe for adoption. They helped snowball popular acceptance. And so, yeah, that's why I bring that up. I think that is the exact trajectory we saw with the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell.